Make it. I still have it. Left them at the altar, so I'm not doing very good, guys. Excuse me? Colon? Hello? Hello? Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing my July monthly wrap-up. July was such a solid month. I had a really good reading month. However, I don't know what the thumbnail is going to be, but by the time you're watching this video, the first thing you would have seen is the thumbnail. I actually got this idea from Brooklyn Libraries. She was talking about how the first thing you guys see in a video is the thumbnail, but we won't know what it actually is until we finish filming the video. However, I do have an idea in mind, and I'm gonna assume that the thumbnail is looking a little bit clickbaity, but I promise that it's going to be the first book I talk about after I wrap up my reading statistics for July, because I have a lot of things to say and I have a lot of emotion I want to express given whatever the thumbnail is going to be. Essentially, there is a book that I read in July that has given me a lot of emotion that I want to express, and I feel like I'm going to give a little bit of a clickbait title slash thumbnail. So getting this out of the way, I apologize, but it will be the first book I talk about, okay? Anyways, as always, if you don't want to hear my spiel about the statistics, or if you prefer to just listen to the books themselves, everything is always timestamped. You can jump back and forth to whatever section that you best prefer, and let's get right into the video, with the first part being my monthly statistics. For the month of July, I read a total of 15 books, which is, as always, astounding. I'm impressed if I could even read 10 books, but 15 books themselves, astonishing, amazing. Honestly, even I'm impressed about how many books I read, and I'm the one doing the reading. And funny enough, I never really know how many books I read until the end of the month. I feel like the month just passes by, and at the time, I don't even realize how many books I'm reading. Now, totaling up all the pages from the 15 books comes out to be approximately 4,192 pages. Next up, we have my daily breakdown by books and by pages. Once again, we see that on day 15 and 16, along with day 27 and 28, I actually took a short break and I didn't read as much on those days. Now I have the piece of data in front of me, and I can actually think back to the past couple of days or just July alone, and I realized that I think I just take breaks after a long series of binge. So you can see that in the first third of the month, I read a lot, and then once we approached the 15 and 16, I'm pretty sure I just took a short break, burned myself out a little bit from all the reading that I've done, and then we proceed with the next couple of days where, once again, I'm repeating the same pattern. I'm reading a lot and then taking a short break on the 27th and the 28th. Now that I see this data and the timeline that previously passed wasn't so far long ago, I can really see why and understand why this pattern exists. Since I recently did my Q1 and Q2 reading statistics, I'm able to really recognize my pattern for the month of July. And since recognizing this pattern, I realized that I am a sprinter. So what that essentially means is that I read in sprints. I take a little bit of a break, and then I continue on with my sprint, and then take a little bit of break, which means that approximately every 12 to 15 days, I binge read. I read a lot, and then I take a short break for a day or two with very minimal reading, and then I continue that pattern on and on and on. And that is something that I just recently recognized, and it's so cool to see and just to learn more about myself and my reading habits, just purely from the fact that I'm recording my reading statistics on its own. As for the month of July, my average star rating was a 4.17 star rating, and the breakdown for all my stars is here. You can see that I actually have 2 books that were 2 stars, and one of the 2-star book is going to be my rant for this video, but more on that in a little bit. Now onto the amount of money I saved for the month of July. I was able to save $73 this month, coming from 4 different library loans slash Spotify premium audiobook feature, which is surprising because in my last video, I said that I didn't feel like I borrowed that many books from the library, but turns out I did borrow a decent amount, or had a decent amount of savings. This month, I'm including something a little bit new, which is what kind of books am I reading? Are they companion novels? Are they part of a series? Or are they standalone? I thought this was a new piece of data that I should include because this month, 10 out of the 15 books I read were all part of a series. Not the same series necessarily, but they exist in some series of themselves. So I thought that would just be a fun piece of data to let you guys know. A lot of the books I read this month were part of a series. Generally, most of the time, I'm a standalone kind of gal, but Something about this month just made me feel like reading books that exist in a longer running series. As for the rest of the books, you can see on the screen that they were all standalones. So none of the books I read this month were part of companion novels. Now, here's a quick recap of the reading format that I had this month. This month was the month where I read a lot of physical books and, excuse me, only one ebook. Surprising. Extremely surprising, especially since the month where I was supposed to be only reading physical books, I ended up still reading a lot of ebooks. That is extremely shocking. I had to double check my piece of data once I saw this. So it seemed like even though I think June was supposed to be my physical book reading month, this month trumps all the other months in terms of physical books read versus ebooks. We did have, in addition to this, one audiobook and a couple of manhwa and mangas. They really shouldn't be counted separately, but I did it anyways, so it's there. And of course, the last piece of data I have for you all is the genre breakdown. You guys can pause on the screen for a closer, more in-depth look, but I'm just gonna quickly go over the ones that stood out to me, with mystery being the third most read genre for the month of July, and a special honorary mention to dark, which so happens to be placed on one of the higher counts of genre I read for the month of July as well. So here is the part we are all waiting for, assuming my actual thumbnail was a little bit of a clickbait, and it is my opinion, my very strong opinion this month on Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. So this book came from the prompt random number generator on my TBR list, and it was originally added on my TBR list from Jessie. I have to say, Jessie, this book was 100% a beautifully written book, and I genuinely really enjoyed this book. And I did not think that her recommendation was amiss whatsoever. So there's that. Now that we got that out of the way, let's move on to my rant. And if you guys don't want to hear the rant, feel free to skip towards another part of the video, but this book's rant will be the highlight of this video for sure. So a good question is, what am I rating this book? And if we're just talking about the storytelling, the setting, the writing, the artistic choices that the author has chosen to do, and the themes that come out of this book, it's a solid 5-star for me. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. This was such a beautifully written book. However, unfortunately, things have come up such that I will be rating this officially a 2-star, both on my spreadsheet and on Goodreads/Storygraph. Now, I'm not gonna lie, if you watch my next video, you will get the first initial reaction to what I thought about this book, especially since knowing what I know now, the reaction when I found out what has happened in this book that made me so mad and so upset. But since I've had a couple of days to sit back, think, and also discuss this with my friends and people who are in my life who know me very well, I feel like I need to articulate why Zevin and what she did was wrong, and why I had to give this book a 2-star rating, even though I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I realized in my previous wrap-up is that I do not give synopsis to the books at all, and I want to change that. So today, I will be trying to give a synopsis for all the books, especially with this book. And in fact, my review for this book is going to be completely spoiler-free because I feel like I should be able to vent my frustration without spoiling the book. So I'm going to give it my best shot. I am going to do my best to explain the plot of the book without spoiling it and what has happened to make me so angry and upset about this book and the author specifically. So Tomorrow and Tomorrow is a story that takes place across 30 or so years, and you get this beautiful interweave between the past, present, and future. I felt like Zevin wrote the book beautifully. I felt like she knew exactly what moment to place a specific memory from the past and what moment to skip forward in the future. It is a beautifully written storyline with kind of two characters that meet each other again and again throughout moments of their lives. So you get to see that story progression. A really big premise about this book is video games. I'm sure you guys already know I am an avid video gamer ever since I was little, okay? I love video game. In fact, I wanted to be a video game designer when I was younger, except that now I realize it's not for me, but I did go down the same path you would take to become a video game designer or become a developer. So another major plot point of this book is that these two main characters are game designers, one of them being a female, one of them is a male. Specifically in this case, the female takes on the role of being the developer. Now, what do I mean by Sadie, the main female lead, being the primary developer? The developer, in my definition and in my case, is someone who writes majority of the code, meaning she's actually the one who's programming what the game action should be, not necessarily the the storytelling aspect of it, but someone who actually implements and physically creates those animation, those graphics, those beautiful movement you will see in a game. That is the premise of the book. And at the very beginning of the book, we see the author, Zevin, beautifully portrays women in tech and women in STEM classes. Again, I'm a developer, meaning I went through very similar situations as Sadie has. Sadie basically encounters in one of her later years of college in a game development class where she is one of the only two females in the class. In her case, she tries to befriend the female and the female outright rejects her. This is something that is not so common now, but it has happened to me and it is a thing. But the fact is that I felt like Zevin depicts it really beautifully with this quote, and I'm going to read it. It's not a spoiler of some sort. It's just a situation and a phrasing of the situation for women in STEM that I agree because I have experienced it myself. And this is the quote. "It was as if being a woman was a disease that you didn't wish to catch. As long as you didn't associate with the other woman, you can imply to the majority, I'm not like the other ones." This quote is kind of true. And this quote, at least when I went to college, does feel kind of true sometimes, where you almost feel as if you're inferior to other men because the program itself is predominantly male. And again, I feel like it stems from the following quote that Zevin writes, which is, "It might have been that the men, most of them at least, assumed you were stupid if you were a woman. Or if not stupid, less smart than they are. They were operating under the assumption that it was easier to get into MIT if you were a woman. And statistically, women had a 10% higher acceptance rate over men." Can you imagine that just by being a different gender and the fact that because you were the specific gender, automatically you get accepted in at a higher rate, and because you get accepted in as a higher rate, the men just automatically assume it's easier for you to get in? Like, that fact in itself astounds me. So you can see why I already really love this book, because Zevin portrayed the woman's struggle in education and in STEM classes so beautifully well, because she follows this up with, "A likely one was self-elimination. Female applicants to MIT might have held themselves to a higher standards than male applicants. The conclusion should not have been that the women who got into MIT were less gifted, less worthy of their places, and yet that seemed to be what it was." I'm sorry, beautifully written, beautifully said, because I cannot imagine how many times I have experienced this over and over again. Because even in my own experience when I was in high school and I got into the school that I did, I've had classmates come to my face and ask, "Why did they accept you?" As if almost somehow I'm less worthy to get into the school. So far, and this is 27 pages into the book, and it got me hooked. I started whipping out the highlighter and highlighting it because I felt like this book was going to be a 5-star read. And it was. It really was. But we're going to talk about the downfall of the book, which happens literally a couple of pages in. So what I just mentioned and everything that Zevin has written about the woman's struggle in STEM classes were on page 27. This is on page 31. You can see the pages. And since this is a game design class, Sadie has decided to write a game called Solution. It's not going to spoil anything about the book for you all, but essentially you should think of Solution as a very thought-provoking game. And honestly, I thought it was an extremely intricately designed game with the words of complacency surrounding it. And when I read that, I was like, this game is genius. I think it was a super smart game. And I was thinking to myself, I'm sure Zevin referenced another video game of some sort. I put that in the back of my head and I continued on and I continued reading the book. I didn't think too much of it at the time, all right? So keep this in mind. Sadie, on page 31, created a game called Solution that has to do with complacency. As we continue on, and I continue on reading the book, can you guys tell that I'm like shaking with emotion because this book was so good and it was so beautiful, but it has made me so upset. So as I continue on and I'm reading the book, right, a really big theme in this is about women being in tech and us being mistreated, and once again somehow that the men are behind all of us. Any good idea we come up with, the men get credit. That's a really big thing. Women not getting the credit that they deserve. I want you guys to recognize this, all right? And I'm going to see if I can find the page where Zevin references this to kind of make my point a little bit stronger, to drill down the morals and the theme that Zevin wrote in this novel. On page 134, Zevin writes, "And next to him, Sadie felt herself diminish." Then on page 122, it is in reference to her asking someone else for kind of like an engine they use to build a game. So a lot of the times when you write game or write code in general, you're not going to 100% build anything from scratch. You're going to take help from existing resources. Now, Sadie asked somebody if she could use their resource. This someone was a man, and this is her response to it. It still bothered Sadie that she had to use it. He was so well known that she was worried people would think her work was his work, and that they didn't know where her work began and his work ended. On this point, Sadie wouldn't end up being entirely wrong. So you guys can see that throughout the book, we have this idea of Sadie, a female in programming, a female in tech, a female in development, continuously feels like she's not getting the credit that she deserves, and that a lot of the time she's overshadowed by another man in her life, or somebody who also took a part in whatever project she is working, even if they are not the primary developer, even if they are not the one primarily working on the project. Now, keeping all of this in mind, let's go back to the game that I talked about previously, which is Solution. As I said previously, I thought the game was very beautiful. I thought it was a super creative game, and I wanted to know if such a game existed, because as far as I can tell, as I'm reading the book, a lot of the games were taking inspiration from actual games that we see in real life that already exist in real life. So my thought process was maybe this game already existed and I could go buy it, try it out, see how I like it. I want to experience the game itself, right? So I search up the game Solution tomorrow, trying to see if there's an actual game it was based off of. Not surprisingly, there was. Surprisingly, what is surprising is that the creator of that game did not get credit, and her name is Brenda Romero. Brenda Romero created a game called Train, using the same word to describe her game, which is a game about complacency. Sound familiar? It's because Zevin also used that same exact word to describe the game that Sadie built in this book. Now, that's only the surface level. Zevin used an existing game as a reference to write about in her book, which is fine, in my opinion. Honestly, I think there's even a gray line about whether or not to credit the person if you're referencing more famous objects in media or history, for example. But the problem here is that Brenda Romero, the game that she created, Train, is not very well known at all. But Zevin did not credit her at all. That's the second level. But the third level to all of this is the fact that Zevin did actually credit a lot of people. Let's flip to the back for the credit page, all right? Now, in the back, she actually credits a bunch, and I'm not kidding when I say a bunch of games. We have the Oregon Trail, Harvest Moon, Animal Crossing, Stardew Valley, EverQuest, Metal Gear Solid, King's Quest, and honestly, like a lot of names. Like I recognize the references to Animal Crossing, Stardew Valley, because those are the kind of games I play. But there were a lot of other references here as well. So my question is, why did she give references to all of these games, but not Brenda Romero? Now, the next layer of this iceberg is the fact that Zevin actually came out and said, it's because it's a board game and not a video game. And that has got me shook in a whole other way. How can you dismiss another woman's work, but also to say, what's wrong with it being a board game? It's still her idea that you took, is it not? And on top of this, all games are just games. Before video games, it was board games. And a lot of video games nowadays are based off of board games. A lot of video games that were created initially were replication of games, of physical games that we have, such as Solitaire. Like a very good example is that we have Solitaire. We can play it with like a deck of cards, and then we can also play it online as a video game, or poker, or anything like that. So why does it matter? Why did it matter that it was a board game, and therefore you did not credit her? And then after she was called out, they doubled down. They were just like, no. And even the publisher was just like, no, we support Zevin, and not crediting. But you'll credit the other video games that you reference? I don't understand, because at this point, it's pretty close to plagiarism, especially since you didn't even give credit. If you even want to stretch it out and say that it's because Zevin didn't know who the original creator of the Train game was, you can even stretch that out. But it's not possible. You want to know why? You want to know why? Because the original creator of the game that inspired the game that got this book rolling, okay? Solution, the game Solution that was created by Sadie in this book, got the plot rolling. You want to know something? Her husband, Romero's husband, was credited to being an honorary figure in the gaming community. But Romero couldn't even be credited for the idea of the book that she had? Hello? Like, make it... I'm so frustrated. Make it make sense, Zevin. You can't write about themes surrounding the fact that women don't get the credit that they deserve, and then blatantly don't give a woman the credit that they deserve. Like, excuse me, but you'll credit a man figure? I'm so shook. I'm so upset. This book managed to make me love it so much. Like, you could see the annotation, right? And then also make me so mad for Brenda Romero. Like, this book like got me messed up. But do you know what was the worst part of it all? Is that the fact that on page 31 is when we are introduced to the game solution that Sadie has created. And again, page 27 is when Zevin writes about how women are mistreated in STEM classes and how men think that women are inferior to them. And while all of this, on page 25, Brenda Romero's husband gets referenced and credited because he is a historical iconic figure in video gaming. I kid you not, this is what it says. It was to say of Dove that he was like the two Johns, Carmack Romero, the American boy wondered who'd program and designed Commander Keen and Doom. Excuse me, you're gonna acknowledge the husband, but not the woman who created the game that got your plot rolling. Excuse me. I'm sorry. It made me so mad. When I found out about this, I'm still mad. You guys can see I'm still mad. I will never buy anything to support Gabrielle Zevins again, because clearly she doesn't support women, even though she has the audacity to write about women and the struggles that they go through about not getting the credit that they deserve. Like, come on. How can you have the audacity to write about that and then blatantly ignore it? I think it's fine if you forget it. I mean, it's not fine, but that's just like the very surface level of an issue. If you happen to forget to credit Brenda Romero, it is something that has happened. You apologize and you add the damn credit. Period. There's no, like, it's as if to say Zevin didn't want to backtrack and show herself of being in the wrong. And that angers me so much, way too much. Now, at this point, I'm pretty sure it was 25 minutes of footage of me ranting and trying to explain the feelings that I'm going through about this book. And I apologize. I have to say, I really apologize for the emotion and the lashing out that I did, but I was very upset. And unfortunately, if you watch my vlog in the next week, you will have basically my first-hand reaction to it all. It might be very similar to this one. It might not. I don't really recall. But anyways, thank you for sticking with me and thank you for listening to my rant. And let's move on to the next book. So, on a lighter note, the next book I finished in the month of July is Funny Story, and I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. This book follows our two characters, Daphne and Miles. Now, Daphne and Miles kind of got left at the altar. I don't know. Best way I could describe it is that their fiancés decided to ditch them and get together. Their fiancés were originally best friends with the whole shtick of, no, I can't see her like that. I can't possibly see them like that. They're like my little brother or like my older sister or whatever, right? But lo and behold, at the beginning of the story, we find out that JK, we take it back, or we love each other, see ya later, and went off and got hitched. They didn't actually get hitched, but you know what I mean. Now, unfortunately, Daphne got kicked out of the house that she and her ex-fiance purchased. As a result, she has to find another place to live, and so Daphne ends up living in Miles' spared bedroom. That's just the premise of the story. Why did I rate it 4.5 stars? I thoroughly enjoyed the character development that Daphne goes through. I also really love a good fake dating trope. The one thing that did not make it a full 5-star read for me is primarily on the fact that I felt like, due to Daphne's character development, the characters should have not really ended or gone super serious with each other at the end. Yes, I know it's a love story, but I think it would have been better if Daphne just took some time to herself, right? Because a really big part about this book is that it kind of feels like a rebound to me. I wished that they had some time between their breakup to really mend and heal. And Daphne dated this guy, her ex-fiance, for quite some time. And for her to have this character growth and this character development, but then also jumping directly into a relationship didn't really make too much sense for me. I know that at the end, Emily tries to soften the situation a little bit by saying that Daphne will find her own place to live and that they really wouldn't be living together anymore, and she moves out of the apartment. But I don't think that was quite enough. I do think that after such a long relationship, you need a lot of time to yourself and to grow. And I think getting together directly afterwards, especially spinning off from a fake relationship, might not be it. Also, the third act breakup the third act breakup. The classic third act breakup. This one wasn't the best. It's not my favorite. It's a lot of miscommunication and it had me a little bit frustrated, but still. Overall, it was quite enjoyable. I really love Daphne, the character. I felt like she's the quiet librarian who struggles with finding friends, making friends, or putting herself out there. That is something I can relate with and I can see. So overall, still really good read. I just wish that, we see that the payoff for the character development a little bit more, especially since we do have an epilogue. I think them getting back together in the epilogue would have been better for me versus the epilogue that we got. But I'm not too mad about it. Still was a super enjoyable read. I have quite a bit of tabs. And yeah, 4.5 stars. Super happy that I read it. It was a really good breather. I really wish I finished it in June, but whatever. All right, my next book is There Is No Ethan by Anna Akbari. This was a recommendation from Ashley Beck's read. Not necessarily a recommendation, but she said she was reading it and the synopsis that she gave really intrigued me. I think I would have picked it up regardless if Ashley recommended it or not, but I'm sorry, it was a 2.5 read. I think she didn't really enjoy it either because the premise, the way that the story was set up sounded really good, but the execution was not there. The execution did not hit. There Is No Ethan is an autobiography / biography following 3 women's experience with one guy named Ethan Schumann. Ethan Schumann is this charismatic ? I personally didn't find the interactions that they had quite charming or charismatic. Honestly, it gave me quite a bit of an eye roll. Not to dismiss any of the woman's experiences, I do think that the execution of the book itself was where it really fell off for me because I don't think they wanted to portray Ethan Schumann as someone who was really charming and charismatic. I think they wanted to show what kind of person he was, but because they didn't do that, I couldn't really see it, and as a result, I struggled to emphasize with the woman. But essentially, we have this man who's a catfish named Ethan Schumann. During the same time, he basically goes around chatting up women, seducing women, and all of these crazy things. But he will never meet them in person. Instead, he creates elaborate lies to get out of actually meeting them in real life. Now, some of his victims do end up falling for his traps for years, and it's quite saddening to hear that. But again, I have to repeat myself because the portrayal of Ethan was not very well done, and the flow of the book was just he said, she said, he said, she said. I couldn't really feel the woman's frustration, nor could I feel and emphasize with them when he's being charming. Overall, 2.5 read. I wasn't particularly hooked. I felt like it was really slow, and what I wanted out of it was kind of the explanation on how we should be more careful about technology and meeting people online. But honestly, it didn't really give that, but I think most of it has to do with the fact that it was more of a 2008 story than it is today's story, and that has been almost like 2 decades of technology advances. And I know as a fact, technology has grown so much since 2008 till now that webcamming with each other, video footage like this is so easy to do that it feels a lot harder to catfish someone. But also, I just wish they didn't phrase it like that in the synopsis that I read, because I really thought I was going to get a whole new perspective on how technology impacts our daily life and the lies. But it really just felt like a straightforward story of 3 women being catfished. So I rated it 2.5 stars. It wasn't particularly enjoyable. I really should have DNF'd it, but I didn't. Now, the next read for July was also similar of a note to There Is No Ethan on completely different scale. It is a manhwa called I'm the Tyrant's Secretary. If you have watched What's Wrong with Secretary Kim and or have read it, I loved it. Beautiful. It was a beautiful K-drama, okay? I loved it. I loved their interaction. It was so cute. I'm kicking up screaming. I really wish I'm the Tyrant's Secretary would be like a historical version of it. It was, in some sense, but it really wasn't. Really wasn't. I felt like the character were very two-dimensional. Haha. I know, I'm so funny. No, sorry. I felt like they were very flat characters. There were no real character growth. The male lead, yes, I love the men who are touch her and die kind of thing, but it really does feel like it's just her and he has no other redeeming quality. Also, the art is questionable. And the storyline is also very flat. Like, it is every stereotypical every stereotypical isekai story. She gets reborn into another world, and then, oh, guess what? We have another arch nemesis who was also reborn into the world. But I finished it, maybe because I didn't want to DNF anything for the month of July, which I don't know why. I need to get back into the habit of DNFing. I did so well for like 1 or 2 months, and then I just stopped DNFing any books, and I don't know why. I just read. Sorry, I picked up my phone to look something up because I don't remember the male lead in one of the books that I read. Okay, I was reading the 7-Year Slip, and I don't know why this is so funny. I was reading the 7-Year Slip, and the male lead for 7-Year Slip, they just described him. I just got to the point where they were describing the male lead, and I was like, damn, this sounded like Edward Cullen. As a Twilight fanatic when I was a kid, she would have dead. I would have been dead. Like, I would have been murdered by my baby self, okay? If she realizes that I didn't know what his name is. Holy crap. And then Lauren commented, if you mean Edward Cullen, I'm going to scream, Edward Cullen. That's his human name, alter ego now. Oh my god. I'm cracking. I'm dying, y'all. Sorry, I'll show you guys. Like, I have like a 50 plus fan fiction about Twilight, all right? That's not including the other amount of ridiculous fan fiction that I wrote on top of all of this about Edward Cullen, about Edward Cullen and Twilight in general. I used to memorize his whole full name. I don't know what that says about me, but I used to memorize his whole full name, which was Edward Anthony Mason Cullen. I still have it. Edward Anthony Mason Cullen. Oh my god, I still have it. Anyways, Lauren, whenever you watch this video, if you ever see this clip, it's a good comedic break, right? Alright. Just have to say that she cracks me up. I love her. The next book for the month of July was another manhwa called The Reason Why Raeliana Ended Up at the Duke's Mansion. Now, I gave this book 4.75 stars. It's so close on being a perfect 5 stars, but the epilogue just didn't hit right. I need the epilogues to hit right sometimes for me to give it 5 stars, but generally, it was a very, very solid read, and I'm sorry, I repent to Lauren, I repent to Chris. Noah is a cutie. I know I said in my July TBR board game, I wasn't too into the art. He looked kind of derpy, but I take it all back. I am reformed. I know what I did wrong. Noah is honestly the cutest boy of them all, especially for Raeliana. I don't even know how he fell in love with her, but he just did. And his actions, everything, so cute, so adorable. I realized that I didn't give a synopsis of the reason why Raeliana ended up at the Duke's Mansion. And I have to be honest, I also realized I'm not very good at giving synopsis of books, but I'm going to try anyways, especially for manhwa. It's harder because there's like these little intricate details that are very different from Western novels. But again, gonna give it a try. The reason why Raeliana ended up at the Duke's Mansion follows our main character, Raeliana, who is transmigrated into a book that she read. So imagine you're just casually reading like Abby Jimenez Just for the Summer, and then suddenly you're the main character. That is basically what it is. Or maybe not a main character, maybe a side character. Actually, a better example. I got a better example, all right? So, my better example, everybody. Now, because I didn't read Just for the Summer, I have no idea what the plot is, but imagine you get transmigrated, you're living your best life, and suddenly you die for unknown reasons. You get moved into the last book that you read, in this case, yours truly, and you're not even the main character. You're just a side character. But if you're me and you love Jacob, I'm gonna woo him. I'm gonna go out of my way to woo him. But you know what happens in the book, right? Since you came from a different world and you already read the whole book. So Raeliana has this to her advantage. And what does she know? She knows that her fiance at the moment is going to try to kill her in the coming months. She's doing her best to break off the engagement, but does not succeed. Since trying to break off the engagement with her fiance doesn't work, she takes it a step further and she approaches Duke Noah. In this case, the Duke is, I believe, one of the highest ranking in the hierarchy. I don't know. I'm not very good with historical ranking, but in Noah's case, he actually has royal blood in him. So he's pretty high up there, and her fiance, I believe Francis, is down here. So Raeliana has the knowledge of what she has read in the book, approaches Noah and goes like, hey, I have a secret that you want to know. He doesn't necessarily take the bait at first, but when Francis approaches her and tries to get Raeliana away from Noah, Raeliana hits him with the actually, Noah and I are in love with each other, so go away now. I'm breaking off this engagement. Now, while he was not really invested or interested prior to this, after seeing what she did, he's now invested, he's now hooked, and therefore they are now a newly engaged couple. Now, while Noah wasn't really interested in what raeliana had to say previously, now he is. He's interested in her by the way she stands her ground, or at least that's what I like to think. And this is where the story kind of takes off. They're battling each other with their wits, trying to figure out what the other want from each other, and they end up in a mutually beneficial contract where she will move into his house, act as his fiance, while he protects her from Francis Brooks. That is basically the synopsis for the story. Kind of fun, kind of interesting, just a very fun romance. I had a good time reading it. Honestly, the story was super cute, super funny, super interesting, and I loved it 100% of the way through. Only reason why it's not a perfect 5-star is that the epilogue wasn't just for me, but I did like how they wrap up the story, and I like the explanation as to why she got moved into the other world. On top of that, I didn't really like the love triangle. Can you even call it a love triangle? Basically, there is a second male lead, but he wasn't really useful. I don't know, he just wasn't it for me. He's not my type, and he was a little bit too clingy for my taste. Unfortunately, that was also another reason why I bumped it down from a perfect 5 stars. All right, now let's move on to the last 4 books for my monthly wrap up. I know I said I read 15 books, but because I read manhwa and mangas, those are generally separated out into volumes / season. So the reason why raeliana ended up at the Duke's Mansion was 4 seasons, so 4 separate books, but I just grouped it all up into one book for the review. So the next book I'm going to review is actually Blue Flag from volume 1 through 4. This is actually a recommendation from Lauren at Love Lauren. I loved the series. I don't know how to give a full synopsis about Blue Flag. To be honest, it really is almost like a slice of life. We see instances of these 3 characters interacting with each other, going to school together, and doing activities with each other. And along with all of this, we have themes of learning about their sexuality, learning about what defines relationship and friendship, and just making friends along the way. I just felt like it's a very, like I said, it's very heartwarming. You get to see the character growth, you get to see them learning about their own sexuality along with how they feel about one another, and it is by definition, and it starts off the series like this, so I don't think it's a big deal to quote unquote spoil it, but it is a very true love triangle. It's so sweet, and there's no drama. You would think that even though there's love triangles, a lot of the love triangle books that I do read pertains a lot of drama or a lot of tension back and forth, but this is not the case for Blue Flag. If you just want to read something slow paced, something to kind of experience and almost feel like it's like your children, watching them grow and watching them learn and experience life while they're approaching their high school, that's how I'm feeling with this book, right? Another solid recommendation from Lauren. Thoroughly enjoying it. I'm not binging it like how I normally read my books, but every time I'm craving something that's just friendship based and will make me feel warm, this is the book that I go to. This is the manga that I flip back to just to read about their character growth, just to see them grow literally and figuratively. So highly recommend this book, especially if you just aren't interested in super historical. It's not a historical manga. That's a new one. It's not historical based. It has no fantasy elements. It's just a sweet story about friendship. I thought this was such a different manga that I have picked up. I wouldn't have picked it up if Lauren didn't recommend it, but I'm so glad I did because it was just so sweet. Now, the next book I read was a buddy read with Chris at Chronically D, and it is The Wicked King. Now, The Wicked King left me on such a high note that I will be reading The Queen of Nothing this month in August. But for now, let's talk about what I rated it, which is 4.5 stars at the time. Now I'm thinking about it, maybe I want to bump it up to 4.75, 5? I have no idea what to rate it. It was so good. It left me on such a high note. I feel like Holly Black loves her high note ending. She wants you to feel that punch when you reach the end. It's almost as if I'm grasping for straws. I'm flipping the pages and just screaming more. more, I want more. And that's why I'm picking up The Queen of Nothing. This is actually my first time reading Holly Black's work, so I don't know what will happen at the end when she wraps up the series, because Queen of Nothing is technically the last book of the Fairy of Elfheim series, I want to say, because we have the Cruel Prince, the Wicked King, and then the Queen of Nothing. I'm not entirely sure, but I want to experience that high that we have at the end of every book, and I'm hoping the Queen of Nothing will also give something like that, but maybe not too high, because I don't want to be in a book hangover moment. Yeah. Now, if you guys have not read The Cruel Prince or The Wicked King, I don't really know how to talk about the second book without spoiling the first book, but I'm gonna do my best. I know I'm the queen of spoilers, but I also want other people to be able to read the books if they don't want to have spoilers. I know I have my little spoiler tag, but it's kind of hard to separate spoilers and non-spoilers, so I'm gonna do my best, at least for my wrap-up, to not spoil anything. So, The Wicked King follows what happens in the first book. Essentially, the whole premise is that we have this human person named Jude who lives in a fairy kingdom. Everyone around her, except for her twin sister, is part fairy. And being human, living in a fairy world, is not easy. But she has somehow managed to infiltrate, maybe infiltrate is not the best word, but basically integrate herself into the fairy society. In the second book, we see the politics and the dynamics of that, but also her struggle with balancing both her humanity and everything that she has to face in the fairy world. It's a fascinating read, and I highly recommend it. I know the first book was extremely hard to get into. I do think Holly Black's writing is very slow in the beginning, but it's kind of like a curve. What kind of curve is that? My math teacher probably hates me right now. What is that curve? An exponential curve. Exponential curve. It's like an exponential curve. It's really slow and then it just skyrockets. Highly recommend it. It has to do a lot with family. It has to do a lot with relationship, tension, backstabbing, thievery, trickery, everything that fairy is known for. Now, the next book is The Poppy War, and this was originally a recommendation from Graham Matthews' review, and then more recently from Jessie. The reason why I picked it up, honestly, was because Jessie said she really liked it, and I saw it at my library. I honed in on it like a honing missile, picked it up, and started reading it. Now, what do I think about this book? I originally gave it 5 stars. I did bump it down to maybe like a 4.5 stars, 4 stars, not because of anything dramatic like the first book I talked about, but funny enough, one of my real life friends did read this book, or at least part of it, so we had a little book club discussion of sort, right? I don't really know what I was expecting going into the book, to be completely honest. I know that it was a Chinese inspired fantasy novel. That's all I knew about it. I like to go into my books blind. Even though I say I like spoilers, 90% of the time, I don't remember a thing. I don't remember anything. My memory, zilch, zero. But let me give you a quick premise of the book. We follow a character named Rin as she enters a military academy. Honestly, this book does a great job of portraying themes with inner society racism, social construct, and then we also have a lot of war. It's supposed to be a fantasy novel, and you can tell that it heavily takes inspiration from China. Even the characters' names are reminiscent of characters that I believe are in Chinese culture. I am not Chinese myself, so I cannot be sure 100%, but we follow Rin's adventures in the academy, all the struggles that she faces, and then a war breaks out. Since she is in a military academy, she does go off to war. Now, to be honest, the first more than half of the book, I was like, what fantasy? There is no fantasy to this. It honestly feels like a historical piece of writing, more like a historical fiction. But at the end, we do have elements of fantasy in there. Was it necessary in my opinion? No, but it did add a little bit of a different flair to the novel. On to why, after my discussion with my friend, made it go from like a solid 5 to potentially 4.5 or a 4. And what I realized after talking with my friend is that R.F. Kuang was very good at writing, but honestly, the experiences along with the actual events that happened in the book were almost one-to-one with what actually happened in history. And I think after what happened with the first book I talked about with plagiarism and whatnot, and honestly, since I read this book before I read the first book that we talked about in this video surrounding the whole idea and concept of plagiarism, I did have to do like a double think, not a double think. Sorry, I'm thinking about 1984 now, and my brain, you should just see the inside of my brain. It's like a storing pot of nothingness. Anyways, after all those thoughts previously and then talking with my friend, I do wish that yes, you can describe the atrocity of war, but you shouldn't make it one-to-one with what has happened in history. I'm trying to find the right word. I feel like it almost boils down what really happens, and those who read it and don't realize that it is an actual war. It's hard because I feel like when you write about real war situation, you get reviews and critics about how it doesn't seem realistic, it's too gory and whatnot, or it just feels like any other history war stuff. And then once you realize that, and you realize as a reader who understands where this is referring to, and the fact that it's almost one-to-one, I guess reading those comments can be kind of disheartening, because I feel like that just means that some part of the world think this is fiction, you know? So I guess that's my only, not even complaint, but a little bit of food for thought after I read The Poppy War, like weeks afterwards, like 1 or 2 weeks afterwards, is that it was so good. The way that the war was described was not really censored at all, which I can appreciate, but also seeing some of the reviews kind of makes it disheartening, because unfortunately the atrocity that R.F. Kuang based it off of are real atrocities that had happened in history, almost one-to-one, very identical. And while that has a layer of like iffiness with, I wish she added a flair of her own creativity in it, but also reading the fact that other people think this might be fiction and rate it as such as being too gory is also another thing that just kind of, you know, it's kind of weird. But even though I have like a lot of thoughts and opinions about the Poppy War, I really want to see what happens in the next book, or maybe see if R.F. Kuang adds more of a creative flair to her second book, since I think the first book is setting up the world and the setting, and as a result she did reference a lot of actual historical events to work into her plot, and I think the second book might have more plot than actual historical events. We'll have to see. I don't know when I'm gonna get around to reading it, but hopefully sometime this year. Now, the last book that I read for the month of July is actually part of Ellen Maid's book club. It's actually her pick for July, and I picked 1984 by George Orwell. I mentioned this previously, but I should have read this as a high schooler. Did I read it? No, but I'm reading it now, and I gave it 3.75 stars. This book was a hard rating for me, and I think it has to do with how I rate my books. I know that there are different kind of people who rate their books, but to simplify, I think there are people who rate the books on its literary aspect, and then there are people who rate it on how much they enjoy the book. Then of course we have the variation in between. However, for me, I definitely lean towards much more on how much I enjoy the book than I do with the literary aspect of it. I struggled a lot with the enjoyment of this book. I think a big part of it was the fact that I couldn't relate to Wilson as a character, probably because I'm not a middle-aged man, probably. But on top of that, I felt like the storytelling was interesting in the premise, but the actual pacing of the book felt really slow to me. I know that Orwell's trying to establish the setting and the world that Wilson is living in, especially for the first part of the book, and also the surveillance, right? And then by the second part, we see more of Wilson's life, and then the last part, we see the ending and the wrap up of everything that has occurred. So it being split up into 3 parts makes a lot of sense, but I felt like I couldn't really enjoy the full flow of the book. Now, a quick synopsis about 1984 is that it's a dystopian world where we have this ideal image of Big Brother always watching you. And in this case, you live in a world where all of your thoughts, all of your actions, your movement, your speech is being recorded, and it's being analyzed to see if you have any potential thought about rebelling against Big Brother. And basically the whole premise of the book that I really got when you boil it down is about the government's power to rewrite history and rewrite our thoughts, basically trying to intrude into our thoughts, making sure we are thinking a specific way towards a specific goal in mind that they have, right? So that's what I thought about the book. I do have a much more extensive, in-depth conversation about this book in my reading vlog that I'm uploading next week, but on the top of my head, my most prominent thought that I have about finishing this book that I want to contribute to Ellen Maid's book club conversation is simply the fact that it's interesting that in Orwell's world that he created, we have devices that can listen to you and monitor you 24/7. It's fascinating because this is 1984 and the book was published, I believe, in 1940s. So almost a century-ish ago, right? His prediction was 40 years into the future, we would be in a dystopian world where we have electronics monitoring us, capable of doing all these things. Now in 2024, is it bad to say that that's kind of true? Like, all of our devices can and are listening to us probably, especially let's say if I say something on here about a book or whatnot, I feel like I will see TikTok ads of it, Facebook ads of it, Instagram ads of it in the next couple of days. So from a technology standpoint, we're at the point where that is possible. But on the flip side of this, a really big part about 1984 is the government's ability to rewrite history. And a lot of this has to do with how much they circulate a certain amount of information and data, but also the fact that everything is destructible. Whereas in today's world, once you put a video out there, once you put a statement out there, you can safely assume it exists in the web somewhere. And even though this is something that I honestly think is true, I also find that we are at a stage in technology where we're not fully there yet, but I can see in about 10, 20 years, the technology will be advanced enough to replicate what we are saying, what we are doing with our faces in video footage camera like this. And I wonder if we will fully enter the world where Orwell predicted that could happen, right? So I also think that part of the book is fascinating. It made me think about the future and how advanced our technology is now based on what Orwell describes, and if the technology can be abused in such a manner. Another pretty interesting topic, and also maybe controversial, is how I feel about Orwell's depiction of capitalism. So I know that 1984 is supposed to be a book about a dystopian future where we are letting the government have full control over our day-to-day practices, our day-to-day lives. And a big part of that comes from like a communistic ideology, right? Now, for me, honestly, I think that Orwell's take on capitalism in the book is also kind of funny and fascinating because it's kind of true in today's world as well. I believe at one point they are talking about what piece of information that the Big Brother party provides, and one of them is just essentially talking about how we don't want to migrate over to what was in the past, which is this capitalist society. So all the wealth contained to just a couple of people with their gigantic, ridiculous top hat, and they have giant houses with a bunch of servants in their house, up to like 40 or 50 servants. And then we have the mass majority of the population working day and night to make ends meet. And honestly, him saying that in 1940, closer to 1950s, is interesting. I really wonder what the economy was like in the 1950s for America, because we are specifically a capitalistic society, right? And it was kind of shocking that what would have been used as propaganda for the communists at the time is really eerily similar to our society today. That might be a hot take. That is definitely a controversial take, but I do think that right now, the capitalistic world that we have right now is almost on par and one-to-one with what Orwell wrote, in a sense that was supposed to be propaganda for the Communist Party. Like, that's just mind-blowing to me, all right? I think that's definitely like a prediction that Orwell managed to make. I don't know if that's like a prediction that Orwell made or if that's just what the propaganda was at the time, but it's still shocking to me to see how that's very similar to today's society and what I see in the world. So interesting perspective from reading Orwell's opinion. But also, funny enough, even though that was described in the story, we also see the same thing happening in the communist regime that is established in 1984, because there's still like different levels of where people are, because we have like the inner party, outer party, and then the paroles, right? So it's still like a pyramid of some sort, even in the totalitarian communistic regime that Orwell has written. So again, really good read. I did not enjoy reading it per se, but I thought it was really thought-provoking. It was on my TBR since January, so I'm glad I finally got it out of the way. Super thankful to Ellen for hosting her book club and pushing me to read a book that I wouldn't have read otherwise. And I think with that, I will wrap up this video. This is probably one of my longer monthly wrap-up, just because I have 15 books, and then I talked a lot more in this reading vlog than usual, so probably why. And I think with that, thank you so much for watching. If you guys enjoy statistical data analysis of reading, if you guys enjoy just reading content, definitely make sure to comment, like, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next Sunday for another video. Bye!